Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you new here, my name is Donna, and for those of you not new, thank you so much for continuing to come back and support my channel. I appreciate every single one of you so very much. Today I am doing a tag video, kind of quasi-tag video, that has been going around YouTube for a little bit now, and it's a palette tag. The first place I saw it was on Lauren May Beauty's channel. I'll link her channel and her video of this down in the description box. I love her channel. She's amazing. She always has such creative content. Probably one of my funnest people to watch just because of the creativity of her content. I really like her, and she seems very down to earth, which I also love about her. She is the first person I saw it on, but like legitimately all I put into the search bar is a palette tag video, and everybody is doing this, you guys. We have got Emily Noel, of course, and then of course Angelica Nyquist. We have Kelly Gooch. We have Mel Thompson. You guys, everybody is doing this. I think my friend Perky just did it herself. So I am really excited to jump into this tag because I think that it is going to be so much fun. So much fun to really dig into these palettes. And some of them I had a harder time with than others. And I wanted to make sure I had a different palette for every prompt. So even though one palette may play another role in my collection as well, it is in a different prompt because that's where I found it to be more prevalent. So let's start this tag. The first prompt in this tag is, what is your newest palette? So my newest palette is this guy here. This is the Marc Jacobs Iconic Flamboyant palette. I just actually got it. I purchased it in May, just actually got it. And as I'm filming this, and I haven't even touched it. I did do the, May haul beauty budget video, so I can talk about this now, but this is the newest palette in my collection. I am so excited to try and use this palette because I have heard awesome things about Marc Jacobs eyeshadows and the formula for his eyeshadows, so I cannot wait to try this. I especially love this packaging. I'm not a huge animal print kind of person, but this packaging is beautiful. I've got some big hair going on today. That feels better. All right, the next prompt is the oldest palette in your collection. So I would, had I not decluttered them, have two older palettes than this one, and that was my Smashbox palettes. I had a Smashbox Full Exposure and Smashbox Double Exposure, and those two palettes would have been the oldest in my collection, but I did declutter them last year, I think, through my Palette Roulette series. And so the next time I purchased any makeup, it was 3 palettes in particular, and one of them is in a different prompt in this video, and another one of them I gave to my daughter. So this would be the oldest, or what I'm categorizing as the oldest one in my collection, and it is the Urban Decay Full Spectrum palette. I just want to remind everybody that I have not been playing with makeup at all until 3 years ago. So this palette is actually only 3 years old, but it is the oldest one in my collection. And I love the packaging of it. That's part of the reason why I bought it. This is raised. I don't know if you guys can see that, but this is legitimately a rainbow palette. This is what it looks like. And you guys can see I have hardly used it. I have used it, but I have hardly used it. It looks fresh. It looks almost still brand new, but it is the oldest palette in my collection. The next prompt in this is, what is your most expensive palette? So the most expensive palette in my collection, I kind of went around and around with because I think this is it. Pretty sure this is it. This is the Natasha Denona Star palette. This was $169. Granted, I did not pay that for it. I do specifically remember getting this on a sale, whether it was a 20% off or some other kind of sale. I'm not really sure, but this is what the palette looks like. It is a pretty heavily used palette in my collection, and it is the most expensive at $169. I do have quite a few Natasha Denona palettes. She's probably a top 5 brand for me, is definitely top 5 brand for me. So like, I'm willing to spend the money on the product I think is worth it, and this definitely is worth it. And yeah, this was the most expensive palette in my collection. So then we go to the most affordable palette in my collection, and that would have to be this one. This is a sleek palette. I just did a palette roulette on this. I can link up in the cards. This actually is a palette that surprised the hell out of me. This is a really amazing palette and kind of gives me almost Subculture vibes from ABH, but not quite. It's missing like a really, really deep, like olive toned green and a nice mustard yellow. This does look like a mustard yellow, but it is actually a shimmer eyeshadow that is a lot more gold. So that's where I would say this is missing as far as Subculture goes. But this palette was only $7 and it's got 14 shades in it, right? No, 12 shades in it, and would therefore be the most affordable palette that I have in my collection. So the next one is your everyday palette. What is your everyday palette? And this is kind of where I got stumped because I don't really have an everyday palette. I do a series called my Palette Roulette series, and it's where I use a palette for a week and then come back to you and talk to you guys about it. And honestly, every day changes for me depending on what my palette for Palette Roulette is. But these stable shadows in my collection that are part of what I add or don't add to a palette, or utilize in a way to, help a palette work if it's not working for me. The stable shadows I have in my collection is honestly this palette right here. These 3 shades are in my Project Pan, but they are 3 shades that I use pretty often because of their shades. This is a really pretty, like, deepening shade. It's got a nice burgundy tone into it. I put it into my crease a lot. This shade here is a beautiful, like, brow bone highlight, inner corner highlight. It also, I've used it as a highlight on my face, and this one I use every single day for setting my primer. So if I have to choose a palette for everyday use, I'm not gonna find one because I have a series that I do. And even before that, I don't think I had a specific palette that I pulled for every day, but I do pull for my single shadows at least 2 or 3 times a week. And this one I use every single day. So I hope that's not breaking the rules because I just broke them if it is. The next prompt is, what is your most colorful palette? So my most colorful palette would have to be one of the Norvina palettes, the Norvina collection palettes by, ABHX Norvina, or Norvina through ABH. I don't know exactly how the dynamics of that work, but I went through all 3 of them, and I really think that the most colorful of the palettes is volume 3, which was the one in the orange packaging. And the reason why I think it's the most colorful is because it has a little bit of everything. It has some purples, it has greens, it has blues, it has browns, it has oranges. I really think that this palette is the most colorful one I have in my collection. The volume 2, the blue one, is mostly greens and blues. There are some other colors in it, but it doesn't really have the pops of purple or the pops of oranges. And the purple one does have a couple pops of orange and a couple pops of blue, but doesn't really have all the browns. So With that being said, I think they're more static, and I think this one is the most colorful of them. I also feel like this one is my favorite of the three because it does have that wide variety of shades in it. So this one is what I marked as my most colorful palette in my collection. The next prompt is, what is your smallest palette? My smallest palette would have to be this. It is the Natasha Denona Mini Sunset palette. This was the first Natasha Denona palette I ever owned. I did purchase it full price myself. It was $25 for 5 shades, which I thought was pretty reasonable because that's the same price you're going to pay for 5, single eyeshadows. I love this palette. You guys can see there is quite a bit of usage in this palette. It is just a pretty perfect everyday kind of shade range. You can use this without even thinking. It does all the thought process for you. I think that this is a beautiful palette, and it is the smallest one I have in my collection. I don't have like duos or trios or anything like that, so this would be as small as it gets for me. As far as size as well, it is also the smallest in size. This is not quite as tall as my hand is. It's also about the width of like some of my flash drives. So I just thought it was the cutest thing, and it is the cutest thing, and it is tiny, so it is the smallest one in my collection. The next one is the biggest palette in your collection. Of course, I'm gonna have to pull out a Morphe palette. This is the Morphe 39S Artistry palette. It is the Such a Gem palette, and I have never used this palette. There are 39 shades in this palette, and I do love every single one of these shades. It is beautiful. That's part of the reason why I've never used it, is because I'm afraid to ruin it. I just stuck my finger in a shadow. I was gonna say it's never even been touched. It has now. It definitely has now. But this is the largest palette in my collection, and to be honest, you guys, I don't think that palettes this large are really beneficial to anybody's collection. You're not going to carry this with you on the road. I have in the past carried the James Charles palette, which is the same size, on the road with me because it was my palette roulette palette, but it is pretty cumbersome. And in your collection at home, it is also pretty cumbersome. It's hard to find a place to store it, even though it's rectangle. It's just so big. So this is the largest palette that I have in my collection, and the largest size palette I have in my collection. The next prompt is, which palette has the best memories? And I have to say that the palette that I keep around for sentimental reasons, as well as really just loving it, is the Urban Decay Electric palette. When I decided to get back into makeup, these two palettes and a Sephora brand palette were the first palettes that I purchased. And prior to purchasing these palettes, I didn't wear makeup. I had 2 palettes, and those palettes were the Smashbox Full Exposure and the Smashbox Double Exposure, as I spoke about earlier. And they're very neutral in tone. If you guys know those palettes, they're super neutral. There's not a whole lot of color to them. I never wore them. Ever wore them. I was very much a no makeup. I didn't even start wearing foundation until last year. Never had anything on my eyes but an eyeliner. Never did anything with my brows. Didn't do any of that until 3 years ago. And when I decided that this was what I was going to do, this palette is one of the palettes that I purchased. And you guys, it looks like this. And I remember getting it in and opening it up and looking at it, and I knew what it looked like when I purchased it, and going, oh my God, that is so pretty. And I remember man saying something to the fact of me always buying pretty things but never using them. And from that point forward, I used this palette solidly for a month. And I struggled. I struggled with it so much. But I loved it, and I love the pigmentation on it. And this is actually how I met my friend Lisa I here on YouTube. She found me through this palette. So I have created great friendships through this palette. I've done many eye looks with this palette, and it's just it holds the best memories for me. So that is why this did not fall into my oldest palette, but fell into my best memories palette. My camera died, so I'm not sure how much was lost. The next one is, what is a palette that was worth the hype? And for me, the first one that came to mind was this, and it is the Morphe Jaclyn Hill palette. The reason why I say that is because there's always issues with Jaclyn Hill launches, always. Whether it's with Morphe or Becca or her own brand. And this was not unlike any of the other ones. It was leaked before it came out, and it was, whatever. There was a bunch of crap behind the scenes going on, but it was also a hugely hyped palette. And initially, I wasn't too sure about it. I had never tried Morphe before this. I bought into this because of all the hype that surrounded it. And walked into it with some skepticism, right? Because this is Morphe. And while you heard back then a whole lot about their brushes that was good, that shouldn't be, because I like myself a good Morphe brush, but they're super cheap and they feel that way, they perform that way, and you have to replace them often, especially if you wash them as much as I do. I walked into it skeptical because you didn't hear much about Morphe shadows that was positive except for from Jaclyn Hill. So I walked into this very skeptical, and you guys, I have to tell you, this is maybe not... I have used it. I have used this so much. I know it doesn't look like it on camera, but I have used this so much. It's maybe not my absolute favorite palette, but this is a really good palette. And having tried many Morphe palettes since purchasing this, I can tell you this formula is awesome. Now, with that being said, I will tell you that the new Jaclyn Hill palettes that are out, anything newer than say 2018, late 2018, early 2019, is a different formula. So I'm not sure about those ones, but these ones, this is an original, and these are awesome. I love this palette. This is a fantastic palette. And if the formula was still the same in all the palettes moving forward, I would tell you to go buy it. What I mean by the palette still being the same, this one is a cruelty-free palette. The new ones coming out are not. From everything I've heard and everything I have read, Jen Loves Reviews actually did a video on it that I can link down in the cards that gives you more information on it. But the newer ones coming out are different than this. But this one was definitely worth the hype. The next one is palettes not worth the hype. What is the palette in your collection that was not worth the hype? And for me, this is probably an unpopular opinion. For me, that palette is this, the Morphe James Charles. Okay, so let me just say, I don't necessarily think it's a horrible palette. I do think it's a good palette. I, however, do not think that it was a good enough palette to be 39 shades. I think it could have been the same size as the Jaclyn Hill and been perfectly fine, been quite a bit smaller. I do think it's really cool that it's got, everything you need all in one palette. I think it could have been smaller. I think that them making it a mini a year later was probably how they should have started with this palette. Put a mirror into it, yes. The fact that it got so much attention is absolutely ridiculous. It's the most absurd thing ever. The fact that James Charles was on Twitter and YouTube anytime anybody had something bad to say about this palette and attacking them was absolutely absurd. And because of that, the hype just kept going for this palette for way too long. Then they came out with a mini a year later, and it erupted all that hype all over again, and it was so stupid. You guys, if you purchased the full size, why would you want to purchase a mini? Anybody who wanted the palette already had the palette in this size. Why make it a mini as well? I just don't think it's worth it enough to have two palettes the exact same but two different sizes. I think that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So, I mean, let's talk about having some kind of, I don't know, newness, some kind of creativity. Like James Charles, if you're going to do another palette with Morphe, cool beans. Learn from your mistakes in this one. Make it a mini. Make it one that has a mirror on it. Yes. Make it the same one? No. Do something different. Like, show your creativity. You are a pretty creative guy. Why not make a completely different palette? That palette it wasn't worth the hype. It blends horribly. It's got crazy pigmentation. I do like the palette. Please do not take this wrong. I do like the palette. I just think that it totally wasn't worth the hype because of its downfalls. It does have opportunity. It definitely has some cons, and it wasn't worth it. Now that I'm off of that soapbox, the next prompt is my fave palette from my fave brand. You guys, I have like a top 5, right? So I can't really tell you, I can't really pinpoint from you like my favorite brands. I would say Natasha Denona and ABH were the two that I like drilled it down to, because those are the two that I really find myself in this place where I kind of stand them. I want everything that they make. I have every Norvina palette, but the last one that pulled, and I don't know why. I get in this mindset where I need to have every single one. But I chose Natasha Denona, and I went with Natasha Denona because my fave one from the other brand is actually a different prompt in here. And that palette is the Natasha Denona Gold. This is a palette by Natasha Denona that I had zero desire to get. I wasn't purchasing this palette. Number one, I hate this packaging. I'm not a gold fan. Again, it is the gold palette. I'm not a gold fan. I hate the packaging of it. This latexy looking gold, or metallic looking gold, is just not it for me. Then you open it up and it looks like a bunch of browns and golds and a couple greens. This is such a beautiful palette. This green is such a beautiful, like tealy, dark tealy, really grungy tealy color. And I really like colorful looks, but I really like I steer more towards like grungy colorful, like darker, more muted, more dirty colorful. And this is all that in a nutshell. This mustard yellow is beautiful. This shade right here that looks green in your camera or in your screen, when I look at it this way, it looks pink. It's like this gold green pink, like multi-chromal color that is just, it is just stunning on, well, you can't, yeah, you can. It's stunning on your eye look, and partnering them together, beautiful. It's my favorite Natasha Denona palette, and that's funny because I wasn't even going to purchase it. There was no way I was purchasing it. I'm so glad, so glad I picked it up. And one of the only reasons why I picked it up was because of watching everybody use this palette and have these most amazing green, grungy eye looks. It's the only reason why I picked it up. The next prompt is, what is your most used palette? And that is where ABH comes in. This is my most used palette. This is the Modern Renaissance. It's one of, I think it is the first ABH palette that I ever picked up, and it is my most used. There's no pan, but I promise you that this is my most used palette. I used the poop out of it. I know that closer up you guys can see the dips in the usage in this palette. Again, remember my collection is only 3 years old and I do have like 100 and something palettes. So there's not going to be a palette that is used a whole lot in my collection. But back when I only had 4 or 5 palettes, this was the most used in my collection. I love this color scheme. And for a long time, this is kind of where I sat in this like browns and reds and oranges. And to this day is my favorite color scheme to wear on my eyes. That is my most used palette. ABH shadows for me are probably the most consistent shadows in my collection. Like I always know what I'm gonna get with ABH shadows, with the exception of Subculture, of course, but Subculture is still a palette that I adore. So yeah, guys, that is my palette tag. All about my palettes. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I hope that if you did, you're considering giving it a big thumbs up. It really does help our channels out here. I also hope that you liked it, or you liked me enough that you're considering subscribing to this channel. I do upload content every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then of course every other Sunday. So 3 to 4 times a week, depending on the week. So please don't forget to hit that notification bell before you go, especially if you subscribe, just so that you're notified every single time I upload. I wouldn't want you to miss anything because, you know, it's fun here, and I want to see you down in the comment section. I want to talk. I want to be your friend. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope that you are enjoying your day, getting out into the sunshine, the weather, whatever it is in your parts. Be safe, of course. Wear your gloves, wear your masks, socially distance. Be safe. If you are interested in doing this tag, I'm not tagging anybody, but I will have the prompts down in my description box. I know I've been quite lazy about doing that lately, but I do promise to get them down there. I would encourage you to do it. I know in my little circle of friends here on YouTube, I do believe my friend Perky has done it, but I would love to see everybody do it. So there's that. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and until next time, bye guys.